Yes, you're already here. In this interview, Claire Sudbery talks about math and teaching, being neurodivergent, experimenting with her hair color during the pandemic, and for creating her own game. I'm Yves from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it. Hello, welcome Claire.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's so great to be here.
Well, it's nice to have you here. For us on a Sunday morning. For me, it's 11:15. What time is it on your side?
It's 10:15, so I'm in the UK in GMT time zone.
And I'm in Belgium, as usually when I'm recording this. And well, it might then be interesting to hear where people are recording it or were watching this recording from when whatever time zones they're in. You've been traveling the world so far. So Claire, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so my name is Clare Sudbery. I've been a software engineer for 22 years. I'm based in Manchester in the north of England, and I'm a technical coach specialising in agile and extreme programming practices such as test-driven development.
Yes, and that's how we got to know each other.
Yes,
And you have an interesting podcast, I would say. And if I'm correct, this is the one that
yes,
you're made for Make Tech,
that's right.
and that you started it in the pandemic, or let me put it this way: I discovered it in the pandemic. Let's put it like this. I don't know
That's
when you
right. No,
started it.
it did. It started a year ago in April 2021, and it's called Making Tech Better.
Yeah, and I really love it. I'm a big fan of the podcast.
Thank you.
Well, it's really interesting interviews. It's always very, yeah, you bring in, well, first of all, interesting people. Some of them I know, some I don't know, but it's always interesting conversations that you have.
I really
So
enjoy
that's that.
doing it. I'm so glad I had the idea to do it, and it is like really the perfect thing to do during a pandemic. Make a podcast.
And that's kind of how I started with the idea. Maybe I'm late to the party as usual. It's almost the end of the pandemic, or at least that's what we're hoping
Well,
that
is
we're
it
at the
though?
end of the
Yes.
so we don't know. But yeah, it's like I said just before we started. For me, I think that the next year I'll probably not go to many different conferences for
Mm,
multiple reasons, and so this feels a way of connecting.
yeah.
So let's dive into that first question immediately. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you are?
So this, when I started thinking about the answer to this was kind of difficult because I tell everybody everything. So there probably isn't anything about me that somebody doesn't know, or that there isn't somebody who knows about. But I thought, what's something that I don't talk about very often?
Yeah,
Uh,
that's kind of the question, indeed.
yeah. And I thought, well, actually, funnily enough, I don't often, not for any particular reason, but I don't often mention the fact that when I was 16, I was, and actually for 10 years between the ages of 16 and 26, I was a very
Quite a long
active
time.
revolutionary socialist. So when I was 16, I joined the Socialist Workers' Party, which is an organisation in the UK that campaigns on the left wing, and I was, a very active campaigning socialist. And I'm not saying that I'm not still a socialist, but I'm not sure that I really get to fly that flag too high because I don't do anything about it. Whereas for those 10 years, I was very very active campaigning, and the second part of the question when you sent it to me by email was, what is something people usually don't know about you but has influenced you in who you are?
Mhm.
And I think it's had a really strong influence on me. It means I have a very, very strong sense of justice. It means that
Mm.
it means that I'm quite cynical about the state of the world. It means that I don't easily trust politicians. It means that constantly ask questions. I try never to make assumptions, and that's true in politics, but that's true in everything. I mean, obviously, I do make assumptions because I'm a human being. I have biases because I'm a human being, and it would be foolish of me to claim that I don't. But I try not to. I try to always ask questions, not take things for granted. Certainly not take politicians' words for things, but to think about
Which,
what's really
considering
happening in
Brexit
the world.
is, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
if you look at the politicians that you had the last years, well, let's not go to dive too deep into that, but yeah,
yeah.
definitely interesting. If you compare what they're saying to what they've been doing, definitely that's
Exactly,
something.
exactly. Yes.
Uh, I like also that you talk about the biases, because the first people that made me think about biases and about how biased I was myself was actually in the UK at XP Day, whatever. I don't know if you were in the room, but I think Rachel Davis was in there. I think Dan Moore. So a couple of
I,
these
I
people.
wish I had been there, but no, I missed out on that one.
It's yeah, it's really because you know that people are biased, but then they ask a few questions and you start to realize, oh, okay, I'm biased also. It's like, damn it.
Mm.
Somehow before I was under the impression that the whole world was biased except myself, which is of course very biased idea.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
but just walking out of that session, I really felt like, oh damn it, yes, of course, and it's logical once you understand it, once you see it, it's like, yes, of
Mm,
course.
yeah.
But it was real eye opener,
Yeah.
and yeah,
But I think also don't not assuming that the status quo has to be the status quo, that whatever situations you find yourselves in, however things happen to be organized, doesn't have to be like that. But also not assuming that it's easy to change, because it rarely is. And human society is an extremely complex organism, and people fall into patterns, and those patterns can be really hard to shift. But never assuming that the way things are is the way that things has to be. I think
yeah,
that's a useful
which
mindset.
helps a which helps a lot as a coach. I mean,
Mm,
it's both frustrating as a coach to walk in and then think that you will be able to change something quickly, which it never is. Or well,
mm,
if it's too easy, it will very be quickly reversed as well.
mm,
But it's not because it's hard and it takes a while that it doesn't happen.
mhm,
So that's what you say. Like, okay, things can change. It just
mm.
will take a lot longer than we think it will take, or
Yeah.
that we hope it will.
And another thing that I learned from socialist politics is this idea of revolutionary change and how that can be unpredictable. So, societies, organizations can tick along doing the same things over and over. Change can feel impossible. But then you can reach a tipping point where suddenly
Mhm.
dramatic change can happen. And that's unpredictable. There is no formula that says that you can make that happen. But what you can do
Hmm.
is believe that it's possible, and know that quite often that you can be planting the seeds for change, planting the ideas for change, and it can seem like people are resistant, and like they're not going to pay attention, or that they're not going to attempt to make change themselves. But what can happen is ideas can bubble under, and sometimes you can suggest something to somebody and they can react negatively, and you can think, oh, okay, that didn't land. But actually, behind the scenes, it did land.
Yes.
They're just thinking about it. It's going to take them a while to process it and to think about whether that's a change that they actually want to make. And then suddenly, whatever, at another period of time down the line, it re-emerges, and you realize, oh, okay, there wasn't an instant effect, but that doesn't mean there wasn't an effect.
Yeah, I realized that actually also related to the UK. I've worked a while at British Gas in Staines. It was called different at the time, but I don't remember. But I was working with a woman, and it looked like she was opposing everything I said, and it was totally not landing. And then, like 5 or 10 years later, I received an email from her thanking me for lots of different things, and I was like, wait. really, I didn't feel that you understood anything of what I said. It was like, wow. And it's good that she reached out, because it really helped me understand. Yeah, sometimes, like you very clearly said, it bubbled. It just takes a while before,
Mm.
and
And
it feels a lot. Yeah, go ahead.
it's also about not underestimating people, because it can feel very tempting to think, oh, as a coach, it's my job to turn up, tell people how to do things, on the assumption that they don't already know how to do things. That I will point out new ways of doing things, point out ways in which things might change, in a kind of patronizing kind of a way, as though they couldn't have worked that out for themselves. And a lot of the time, that's not it at all. I mean, it might be that as a coach, I have experiences and knowledge and ideas and techniques that they haven't come across before. But a lot of the time, it's about pointing out the things that everybody knew. It's not that they didn't know that things needed to change or that there were problems, but it's giving them the tools to articulate that and
And the
to
permission
highlight
sometimes.
it. Yeah, and to highlight it in a way that they might then be able to make a change.
Yeah.
And often it takes an outsider to point out that all of the things that are ridiculous, that everybody knows is ridiculous, it's just that they've been putting up with it, and for somebody else to say, yes, but hang on a minute, why is it like this? And they go, I don't know, it's just always been like that. Yes, but can we change it?
And like you say, but asking a lot of questions, because I've just listened to recently, I think this week, to a part of a book. I think the book is called Multipliers, where there is a woman who's articulating about a lot of problems she has with her young children, getting them to bed, and it's always a struggle.
Mm,
And one of her colleagues challenges her to say, okay, let's tonight, when you come home, from the moment you come home until you go to bed, let's only ask questions to your children. And she thinks it's ridiculous, they're too young or whatever, but somehow he convinces her to try it out, and she does exactly that. And instead of telling them when to go to bed, she's asked, okay, when you go to bed, and they know, and what do you need to do in your bed ritual, and they say, okay, first we need to brush our teeth and this and that. And she's like, wait a minute, I've been pushing all this time, and they all know. And that's is
yeah.
exactly what you say. We shouldn't patronize, we shouldn't be, especially with adult people, we shouldn't just be telling them. Most of the people that we coach, they know most of the stuff that we're saying.
Hmm.
um, and actually, the more we push, the more resistance we get.
Mm,
um, and I can imagine, as a technical coach, yeah, it might even be daunting, because part of it why you're hired is, of course, because they want you to teach them techniques. But like you say, well, a lot of these techniques are not new. They've been existing. Some people might have actually tried it in in another time and place. Just giving permission, just telling them a little bit how to do it, and asking the annoying questions, that might be enough.
mm. It
It's
can be tricky though. As a teaching technique, and I used to be a teacher. I used to be a high school maths teacher,
mm,
and
yeah, I forgot
it's
about that.
a common teaching technique is to ask questions rather than tell people things, and that works particularly well one to one, and particularly in maths, which is the subject that I taught. So when, instead of saying, maybe the pupil is struggling with, I'm giving a very very simple example, but maybe the pupil is
Mhm.
struggling with their times table and they want to know what's 9 times 5, um, and you could just tell them it's 45, but that's not going to help them very much, actually. So instead you'd say, well, what is 9 times 5? And they go, I don't know. Well, how could you work it out? um, and if they give a wrong answer to something, you say, well, why do you think that's the answer? What were the thought process that you went through? And so asking questions is a really good way of teaching, but you have to be careful, because sometimes it can just come across as really patronizing. So for instance, if you're pairing with somebody and you go, it's really hard to describe, but you said, so what do you think is the problem here? And what do you think you should do next? And what
Mm.
do you think about this? And sometimes that can just get really annoying. And it
Yeah, it's
can feel
like,
really
why don't you just tell me you're here to help me? And yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
and when you're there's a trick when you're doing a live presentation to get the audience engaged in what you're doing, where you can ask the audience, so what do you think about this? Or maybe there's a thing that you're about to tell them, but the first thing you do is you ask the audience, so hands up, who knows the answer to this, or who can tell me about this? And you can very quickly start sounding like a classroom teacher. And actually, that often doesn't land very well. And you're just faced with a sea of grumpy faces.
Yeah, it,
we're not children.
especially if there's only one right answer that you're expecting. If you
Yes,
that's the kind of
exactly. Closed questions doesn't work. Open questions are so much better, and it's a mistake that people often fall into when they're doing a presentation, because they want to try and get audience participation. They reach a particular point in the presentation, they know what the next bit is, but they ask a question, what do you think it is? And it's a closed question, there is only one answer, and everybody's like, oh, really? whereas if you say to them, what are your experiences of this, or who has an interesting experience about this, or what are your opinions about something, or something that gives people room to expand, or where you don't know what the answer is going to be, where the content is unpredictable,
and then we learn both.
Yeah.
That's the interesting part. But of course, you have to be, how would I say it? You have to feel at ease. You have to be ready to for answers that you're not ready for, in a sense,
Yeah.
and to be ready to engage and learn from things. And and especially teachers, sometimes I've noticed that with with my teenage children, that some of the teachers that they're working with, they don't like it when kids have other answers or when they explore things. It's like, no, they want to be up on the stage and have the best answer, and everybody should listen to them. But it's, like you say, when they start to get in a patronizing way, it's never nice as an as the audience, I would say. I like that way of bringing it. So that's just brings us in all different kind of directions already, that first question. I want to go to that next one because I'm really interested in that one, and I kind of know the answer, but I don't know where you would go with. What if you had not been to IT, what would have become of you?
Yeah, so it'd be interesting. You say you kind of know the answer. You probably do, and it's extremely relevant to what we were just talking about, because it is teaching. And my original plan, my original life plan when I was a teenager, because I'm a big one for plans. I'm always looking ahead to the future. And when I was a teenager, I thought what I was going to do with my life was that I was going to be a maths teacher. That was my plan. I come from a family of maths teachers and lecturers. I really liked maths. I liked the idea of teaching. And I just thought, that's what I'll do. I'll finish school. I'll go to university and do a maths degree, and then I'll do a postgraduate certificate in education, and I will train as a maths teacher. That's what I thought I was going to do. But while I was doing my maths degree, I had friends who were teachers. In fact, I had one friend who was a maths teacher, and they said, "No, don't do it." And it's interesting,
Wow.
the timing of it as well, because I graduated in 91. And in 1988, which is actually when I started at university, there were massive changes in education in the UK. I can't remember what it was called, but there was an Education Act in 1988 that had a big impact on teaching. There was a lot of kind of interference, if you like, from politics in education. Everything became very tightly defined. Everything became very bureaucratic. The national curriculum came in, which meant that the teachers had a lot less freedom in how they structured their lessons and how they structured their content. And people I knew who were teachers were just like, nah. You think you have this dream that being a teacher means that you get to teach and you get to interact with people and
Why not?
nurture young minds, but it's not like that at all. It's really hard work. It's really bureaucratic. It's really soul destroying. Don't do it. So I didn't. I actually ended up not really sure what I wanted to do for a while. I became a housing officer for the local council, not because I had any particular desire to be a
But
housing officer.
you finished your degree as a math teacher? But you
No,
just
well,
didn't
it
start.
wasn't. So it wasn't a teaching degree. I just did a. So
Okay.
the way that it works in the UK, you can do a teaching degree, but it's more common to just do a degree in whatever subject it is you want to specialize in, and then after that, you do a 1-year teaching course, which is just a neutral, generic teaching course called a PGCE, which is a postgraduate certificate in education. So my plan was to do the maths degree, which is just a maths degree, and then do the PGCE. In fact, it was joint honours. I always say, I was talking to people about this the other day. I actually have a degree in maths and philosophy, and they were equally weighted. It's joint honours, maths and philosophy.
Mm.
But I always tell people that I have a maths degree because it sounds more impressive.
It,
I think
so it sounds more impressive to have something of one than actually the two, because you
no,
have two.
it's
It's a
not the
combination.
combination, it's just that maths, and this actually again shows one of my biases, because I grew up in a highly mathematical family. So my father is a maths professor, my parents met at university where they were both studying maths at Cambridge. I have uncles and aunts and cousins who are all maths and physics teachers
Mm.
and doctors and all the rest of it. So I think of maths as being very serious, very important, and very impressive. You have to be really clever to do maths. Whereas philosophy, anybody can do philosophy. So, and I don't think that's necessarily true, but that's definitely quite a strong prejudice in my brain, and I suspect it is in a lot of other people's as well. I am prouder of the maths than I am of the philosophy, and that's I don't think I'm necessarily right about that, but if I'm honest, that is how I feel.
And, and is that something your parents taught you, or just you just got from
It's
them,
not
or?
explicitly, no, and it's actually quite interesting because I wonder if you were to ask my father, well, certainly if you were to ask him, then it becomes a loaded question. But if you were to
Mhm.
ask him, which is more important, maths or philosophy, he would probably say, well, neither one, they're both important. And actually, my love of philosophy comes from my father, who is also very interested in philosophy and lots of different ideas. So I'm not sure that anybody in my family ever said maths is better than philosophy. But everybody in
The
my
world
family
was
that
exactly, yeah.
highly values maths. Maths is a valuable, impressive thing. And also, when I tell people I can do maths, they're impressed. I don't know. It seems impressive to me, and I honestly I don't know where that comes from. Apart from the fact that just maths was very, very highly valued throughout my whole family, and generally is, I think, in society. I think probably taken more seriously. But anyway, yeah. So I had the joint honours degree, and then I thought that I would do the PGCE, but that was the bit that I changed my mind about, and I ended up graduating
Mm.
with the maths and philosophy degree and not carrying on to do the teaching qualification, and instead just sort of drifting for a while. Really, I worked as a housing officer for a little bit, and then I became a software engineer, and this is long enough ago because I'm not young. I'm 52. I graduated in 91, and at that point, it was possible to do a whole degree without ever touching a computer. And in fact, because I did joint honours, the computing element of the maths degree got dropped to make room for the philosophy. So I didn't do any computing at all as part of my degree.
Mm.
It would have been a standard part. One of the courses in the maths degree was actually computing, but it got dropped because of the philosophy. And also, I wrote all my essays by hand with a pen on paper, which probably seems weird to modern young people, but I didn't use a word processor. I didn't have a computer. I didn't have easy access to computers. I mean, there were some at the university, but I didn't use them. And so I ended up working for the council as a housing officer, having very little experience of computers. Again, still didn't have one at home. And then I had a boyfriend who was a games programmer, and
Mm.
he encouraged me to buy my first PC.
He
And
didn't give you his old PC. He did
no,
just
no. He gave me advice on what to buy. It was a Windows 3.1 machine with a monitor, the big fat monitor. None of this flat screen nonsense. It had a back as well as a front. And my first
which
monitor was black and white. And then I got a color monitor, which was very exciting. But sorry, I interrupted what you were going to say about when I was talking about monitors.
Yeah, no, it was that was the kind of computers we had at the time. I actually did. I started math at university as well, but mine was math with an option in IT,
Hmm.
because the section IT didn't exist at the year I did. Actually, the year after they split it up, and then they had that. And like you say, there were computers, and I started that in 1991, so somewhere around the same time.
Yeah.
Um, it's yeah, it was an interesting time if you compare it. Still remember thinking at that time. My father was actually working with computers at that time, and I was thinking like, oh, he had all these interesting. He was at the start of the computers. He worked with some of the very first computers in Belgium, and I thought at that time in 90, oh, he was at the interesting part. Where if I look now back, it's like, no, there's actually a lot more interesting stuff happening now. But at that time, it felt like all the interesting stuff happened before us.
Yeah,
Uh,
interesting. Yeah, so I had this computer with Windows 3.1 with MS-DOS in the background, because Windows 3.1 kind of ran on top of MS-DOS,
mhm.
which was the operating system. Um, and barely understood any of that, but could see that my boyfriend and his friends who he worked with, who were all games programmers and graphic designers, um, they were having a great time, and I was thinking I could do that. I I've
And
got
it's a lot of maths, I think. Yeah, with
exactly.
gaming, there's a lot of maths in it. Yeah.
Got a highly analytical brain. I'm really logical. I mean, the one thing that I did do a lot of at university was logic, because that's the obvious connection between maths and philosophy. So I
Mhm.
did mathematical logic and philosophical logic,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of stuff in there that is relevant to computer programming. And I thought I could do that, and I think I'd really enjoy it. And I was sharing a flat with a woman called Kay, who did a master's in what was then UMIST, at University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology, which is now just part of the University of Manchester. Um, and she did a 1 year master's, which was a conversion course, which was designed to take people who had non-computing degrees and turn them into computing graduates. So
Hmm.
the people on the course were about 50-50 arts and science graduates, but it taught computing, and it kind of it encouraged people to either go down the coding route or to go down the analysis route. So there was this idea of a systems analyst, and the idea was that once you'd done this course, you might enter a career either as a programmer or as a systems analyst.
Because that was still divided at the time,
Yeah,
very much into university.
yeah,
Yeah, I remember
yeah.
that.
So I did. That's what I did. I went back to university. I did this 12-month course. It was actually. It wasn't an academic year. It was 6 months taught and then 6 months. What do you call it? Dissertation. So a full 12-month course, and I came out of that knowing how to program a computer in C++, knowing OOP. They taught a lot of object-oriented programming, which was new and shiny and exciting, and it was very cutting
At the
edge of them to
time.
be teaching object-oriented programming. So I learned object-oriented programming in C++, and then I just walked into a job as a programmer. But back to the original question, which was what would I have done? I would have been a teacher. But what's interesting now is that I never forgot that. And there were, after 12 years as a software engineer, I was made redundant, and I was fed up of working in IT. This was in uh, 2007, I think. And I left IT, and then kind of drifted for a while. I actually thought I was going to be a novelist. Well, I was a novelist, but I thought I was going to try and make a living as a writer. I couldn't make a living out of
Mhm.
it. So then I thought, you know what? I've never forgotten how my
The math.
original ambition was to be a teacher. I'd still like to be a teacher. I'm going to give it a go. And I did actually retrain as a high school maths teacher. I did finally do the PGCE, and I did become a teacher, but it was a bit of a disaster. So what I like now, I didn't last long in high school at all, less than a full year of teaching.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was really
I
short.
thought it was more than a year. Okay,
No,
somehow I
no, because there
misunderstood
was a
that.
4-year gap in my career, but the whole 4 years wasn't spent teaching. So out of those 4 years, 2 years I was being a writer. 1 year I was doing the PGCE. So I spent a year
Ah, of
training
course.
to become a teacher, but then I didn't last a full year actually teaching. I did 2 terms Well, I did 2 terms as a classroom teacher, and then I did 1 term as a one-to-one tutor. So I was working in a school. I was helping the children who were struggling. So I was working one-to-one with them to help the ones who needed a
Mm.
bit of help to pass their exams. But then after that, I gave it up altogether and I came back into IT. But what I like now, I remember when I joined ThoughtWorks, and so that was after I'd been back in the industry for a good 6 years or so. I joined maybe 5 years. I joined ThoughtWorks as a consultant, and the very first project that I worked on was with Stockport Council. And I helped Stockport Council to train up their junior engineers and to just generally do a bit of training. And I enjoyed that so much. And I remember saying, oh, it's fantastic. I get to be a teacher without having to be a teacher.
Because of the bureaucracy that you didn't have then, or what?
Yeah,
Or
unfortunately, being a high school teacher in the UK, and I'm guessing in a lot of other places too, is just pretty grim. And it is because of the bureaucracy. It's because there are decades of political interference. Education is a political football. And what
Mm,
happens is when people are putting their manifestos together, when people are trying to win votes, when governments are trying to look impressive, education is an easy target. They'll say, we're going to make education better. And typically the way that they do that is by introducing even more legislation. And like, we're making education better, and also not just introducing legislation but also scapegoating the teachers. The problem with education is the teachers, so we're going to make the teachers better. We're going to make
mm,
it easy to sack teachers. We're going to make it easy to point fingers and blame at teachers, and everything lands at the teacher's door. So for instance, when I was teaching, there were all these amazing initiatives that sounded great. Like, for instance, there was one called Every Child Matters. Well, of course Every Child Matters. That sounds wonderful, doesn't it? But what that actually means on the ground is that there is a big list of things that you as a teacher have to prove that you're doing. And in order to prove that you're doing them, you have to jump through a lot of hoops and tick a lot of boxes, and there's a lot of paperwork, but you're not given the resources or the time to do any of that stuff. So for instance, when you're teaching, you're constantly being judged. There are people constantly coming into the classroom, observing what you're doing, and then giving you a report, which again should
mm.
be useful feedback. Great, yeah. But what the form that takes is that somebody's giving you scores and telling you either I think there were 5 grades when I was doing it, and again it might have changed, but I don't think it's changed very much. You could be graded outstanding, good, satisfactory, unsatisfactory, or inadequate. And getting those lower grades could be pretty soul destroying. And you've got somebody standing at the back of your classroom with a clipboard in their hand, looking like death. And looking for things to catch you out on. And you have to prove, while you're being observed, that you are engaging with every single one of 30 pupils who often have the extreme behavioral needs, who are teenagers with hormones. They're not necessarily engaging with, they don't care about maths. Most of them hate maths. But you have to prove that you're engaging every single one of them, and that you know about every single one of them, and you're catering to the individual needs of every single pupil, which again sounds wonderful, but isn't possible unless you're given the resources to do it and the time to do it. And if
Yeah,
you can't do it, and in fact you can't, literally, so the workload that you're supposed to do involves all of this individual attention to all of these people, involves marking all of their homework, involves having sight of their exercise books every day, involves creating individual lesson plans for every lesson that you're not allowed to reuse. If you were to actually do the things that you're supposed to do, you would never sleep. It's not actually possible. But it's also not allowed to say this isn't possible. Nobody's allowed to say that. You're not allowed to admit it. You can't admit it. Your head of department can't admit it. Your school leadership can't admit it. Because if they said it's not possible, then they would be admitting failure, and then they would be judged, and they would lose funding, and they would go down in the league tables. So we all have to pretend that this is possible. And you're not allowed to say out loud, even to your closest colleagues, I can't do this. You just have to pretend that you can, and find ways of making it look as though you're doing the things that you can't actually do, because it's not really possible. And to somebody like me who hates to lie and is incredibly thorough, and if somebody tells me I have to do something, then I will do it. I was getting 4
Even
hours
if it's
sleep a night.
unhealthy. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I couldn't survive.
Yeah, but this is very similar to what I hear a lot of people saying in Belgium about education. And I've been saying for a while that for me, teachers is a very lonely job, because you're usually alone. You don't work with your colleagues. You're alone in front of a classroom. You don't get feedback. In your case, you might get some feedback, but like you say, it's in a very unhealthy situation that the feedback is collected.
Mm,
So that's definitely not healthy.
mm.
Yeah, it's
I
I
mean,
hear a lot of complaints in a lot of different countries that look very similar.
yeah, yeah.
And always never enough money, never the time for the teachers, always a
Mm,
lot more bureaucracy to kind
mm,
of prove, and the system is wrong, but we blame it on the teachers. Yeah, that's kind of what education feels in a lot of countries.
yeah. It's a tragic tale for me, because you know, what happened in the end, because the part of this whole thing of, you know, having to meet quotas and having to prove success, the school that I was working in was in an inner city area. There was a lot of deprivation. There were a lot of children who had significant problems outside of school. You know, of course they didn't care about maths, because they were covered, you know, I mean, not all of them, but I had children in some of my classes who were covered in bruises, or, you know,
Wow.
who were living in extreme poverty, who had a lot of problems to be worrying about outside of the classroom. So of course they're not going to be giving me their full attention, and really, why the hell should they? Um, and
But you're not even allowed to say that in the classroom when someone is standing at the back as well. So
yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
So
Yeah,
that's
and it was recognised as being a challenging school. And there was a senior member of staff who made it his business every year. And there's other people told me this, and I saw it happen, to get rid of 3 of the newly qualified teachers. Now, they were officially a training school, so that meant they had a higher proportion of newly qualified teachers, who are called NQTs, who are the people who've just done their PGCE and are brand new to teaching. Because they had this training status, it meant they had a higher proportion of those than other people. But they had a really good track record, which is actually why I applied to work there, because they had this really good track record for you know, training new teachers. But the reason they had such a good track record was because every year 3 of those new NQTs would drop out and would quit. And then the rest of them were all doing really, really well. So the ones that weren't doing really well would quit, disappear off the radar, and not impact the figures. But the reason those 3 teachers were quitting every year was because this senior member of staff was targeting them and getting rid of them. And the way that he did that,
instead of helping them and becoming better,
yeah,
which what is
exactly.
what it should be.
And
Yeah,
then they could point at, look at these teachers, they're doing so well, and the ones that weren't doing well was just like, no, they just get rid of them. And
playing the
I
system.
fell foul of that. Yeah, so it was pretty, and the way that he would do it is just by making things so horrible for them that they wanted to quit. And then, as far as their numbers were concerned, well, we're a challenging school. We know we're a challenging school. We know there's a high dropout rate in teaching. Some people just can't cut it. They just can't stay the distance. And we did our best to support them. We tried to help them, but in the end, they couldn't cope, and they left. And oh dear, never mind.
And probably from their standpoint to make sure that they have good is, and they didn't want to, yeah, they could rationalize it why they did some of that stuff.
Mm, mm,
Which it's probably again playing in the system to keep yourself or your system alive as well.
Mm,
Okay, I want to go to that next question because we've just been talking about challenges. What is for
mm.
you, and why doesn't it show? Yeah, now it shows. What is your biggest challenge, and why is that a good thing for you?
So, I think probably one of my biggest challenges is coping with the fact that my brain seems to work significantly differently to a lot of people. And I've been told my whole life by friends, and generally just people react to the way that I sometimes behave and the things that I say and the things that I say I'm thinking. It's like, what? I seem to be quite unusual, and now, and people have told me that I'm weird. People are always telling me that I'm weird, and now what I recognise is that now I can use the term neurodivergence, and I can recognize that I am probably autistic. I may well have ADHD, but really, just the important thing is that just my brain just does seem to work differently. I seem to think things that other people don't think. I seem to react to situations in ways that other
Mhm.
people don't react. Um, and it's always been a challenge for me to try and work out how I map the way my brain works to the way that other people's brains seem to work. But the reason it's a good thing is because it makes me because I'm unique, and actually the fact that I do think and behave differently, I actually learned a long time ago as a teenager, and people are complicated. So I can simultaneously celebrate my differences and also worry about it and think, oh no, I'm a weird freak and nobody understands what's going on in my head. And why does nobody else make sense to me?
But
Um,
that's similar to a lot of people, I think.
yeah,
That part
exactly.
you, that's
Yeah,
many people
yeah,
have that.
it's not an unusual experience, and it's why I don't I'm not emphasizing the labels of autism and ADHD. What I'm emphasizing is the difference. And actually, you're right. Everybody is different from everybody, so everybody has that feeling at some point. But
No, but I was stressing the fact that you worry and celebrate at the same time. I think
yes,
that's something a
yes.
lot of us do.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah, and I did, and I learned as a teenager really that well, okay, so I'm weird and different. Well, that's okay. I'll be weird and different. Uh,
Mhm.
and things like having blue hair and actually kind of announcing to the world, yes, I am weird and different, and I enjoy it and I celebrate it, and that's okay. And that's how it helps me, is by actually deliberately standing out, and deliberately celebrating the ways in which I'm different, and recognizing that some of those things are strengths and actually mean that I can carve out a niche for myself and make a name for myself, and actually, you know, it can work to my favor.
Because your hair, for example, now you're talking about, you don't have that for a very well. When I first met you, you didn't have blue hair. Just to
No, no,
do that.
that's been, how long is it since I've had blue hair? Since the pandemic. It was a pandemic thing. So not
Really?
quite, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So
I thought it was a little bit before, but yeah, it's possible. I
well,
don't
it's
remember.
it sort of is. So when I got married, which was in 2019, no, 2000 and yeah, 2019. So the year before the pandemic, we were lucky. We managed to get our wedding in 6 months before all hell broke loose. Um, but I that year I started to experiment with it. So what I did was I had longer hair. I had a bob, and I dyed just the front part blue. So it was mostly blonde, but there was a little blue bit at the front, and I did that for the
Hmm.
wedding. And at the wedding, I had a blue undercut at the back as well. So I'd been experimenting with having a little bit of blue, and then the pandemic started, and I couldn't go to my hairdresser anymore. And I just thought, what am I going to do about my hair? I thought, well, the easiest thing would be if I just shaved it all off. I thought, yeah, if I shave it all off, I know, because now it's mostly grey, that when I shave it all off, I just look like I've probably got cancer or something. So I shaved it all off and bleached it, and then it was too white. So then I dyed it blue. I was like, okay, this works. So, and ever since then, every 3 months, I shave it, bleach it, and dye it blue. And it's just really, really simple and easy. But also, I really like it.
And you can do it yourself on top of it.
Exactly.
That's
Yes.
so that's also that's an advantage. I mean,
Yes.
in a sense, it's a nice extra story. I'm glad I asked the extra question there. But yeah, I recognize, and you're very open about being different. I mean, you've been tweeting, you've been doing talks about neurodivergency and everything that basically you're still learning about yourself, I think, and learning about the people around you.
I am. It's a very strange thing, because I absolutely, I've always had a lot of friends who are autistic. I have family members who are autistic, and I've always identified very strongly with people who are autistic. And I've always thought that I got them. They made sense to me.
Hmm.
But I didn't realize initially that I might too also be autistic. And then slowly, I began to think, yeah, you know what? Actually, maybe I
I
am
might be much.
too. Yeah. And now I'm at the point where I think, yeah, I pretty much say yes, I am. But I'm self-diagnosed, and I haven't sought. Well, no, that's not true. I have sought an official diagnosis, but via the NHS in the UK, which means it's going to take absolutely forever. I haven't gone private because I'm not quite sure what difference it'll make to have somebody officially say, put a rubber stamp on me and say, yes, you are autistic. It's like, well, so what? It is helpful to me to be able to understand some of my behaviors and also to be able to relate to other people. But I don't think it's going to change anything. I think that there will be some circumstances in which actually it makes people prejudiced towards me in a way that won't be helpful to me. So I don't feel like I need, for instance, any official help, like any kind of aids and
Mhm.
adaptations, I don't feel like I need employers to make any differences for me. So I just think, yeah, okay, I'm autistic, and that's just, I'm quite happy
So
to
now you
be.
have the choice to share it when you want to share it, and it's
Yeah,
not on an official document that kind of forces
yeah,
you in a certain box in a
yeah,
sense. I
yeah,
I can get that. That's definitely something that might make a difference. Again, like you say, because then people might see just the document and just the number, and then just the okay, this is another autistic person without having seen you as a whole person. Because
mm,
yeah, even there, you're different than some of the other people. That's
exactly. Yeah,
that's yeah, I can but it's good. The reason why I brought it up is I see you talking about it regularly, both on Twitter or just at conferences to tell people like, okay, this is kind of okay, this is what I'm discovering, this is what makes me different from neurotypicals and these kind of things. So it's I think you bring well, I think you brought awareness to some people in our community, which is good.
good. Yeah,
And I see more people doing this, so I'm glad that this is happening.
yeah,
I'm always yeah, I'm always in favor when people talk more, and especially because you can bring it from your own experience, like you say, okay, this is how it what it actually means for me, which is different for some people because somehow when they read it or when they see numbers, they think about an imaginary person or about somebody that they saw in the movies, but you're here as a real person with
yeah.
yeah, a
What
little
what
bit different.
One of the reasons it's confusing for me as an individual and also confusing for the world at large is because autism is a very, very broad spectrum. It's not just one thing. There's a quote which I think comes from Jamie, whose surname I've forgotten, which is, just because you've met one autistic person, that just means you've met one autistic person. That actually all autistic people are different. They all face different challenges. So, for instance, I often point out to people when people talk about it within organizations and talk about how they can support autistic people, you'll hear people saying things like, oh, well, that autistic people can't make eye contact, or, oh, well, that autistic people don't like change, or autistic people can't cope with really bright, noisy environments. Then those things are all true of some autistic people. None of them are true of all autistic people. Different autistic people have different challenges, different things that make them special, different things that make them different. And all of those things are all things that neurotypical people can relate to. That because we're all on a spectrum, and any one of those things, um, like, if particularly as an individual, if you're thinking, am I autistic and what does it mean? Any one of those things, like for instance, I like it when the mugs all hang in the same direction on the hooks. Well, so do a lot of neurotypical people. It's like, so what? It's like, well, and it's just that when you add it all together, there's more of that going on in an autistic person. But they will have it's like a graph, with lots and lots of spikes in different places, and different people will have spikes in different places.
Yeah, it's my partner works with people who have autism, but who have typically this is they have much more challenges. They typically, so I'm not going to go into the details there, because of course these are in a sense patients of her. But yeah, it's they're all different in their challenges, even though, and that's like you say, they these are people who cannot, or most of them cannot function in the normal world like you can, and that's already a big difference. But that there is so much differences. It's like, yeah, we would never say that, oh, I've met one person who broke an arm and now I know how about all people who ever broke an arm, because it's all the breaks are always different, and even if you broke an arm once or twice, it might feel completely different. So it's that's definitely not something we would say about these people. So that's it's I think I heard that quote from you the first time about
Right.
when you met one autistic person. It's just one autistic person.
Yeah, and it's also possible, like one of the reasons it took me so long to work out that I probably am autistic is because none of the challenges that it creates for me are insurmountable, and none of it means that I can't function in the same way that neurotypical people can function. And also that means that people very close to me have questioned it, have said, well, you're not autistic, because I can do all of the things that autistic people are not supposed to be able to do. It's just that there are challenges which aren't always very visible, which I do have. There's a lot of stuff that I internalize, and there are a lot of things that just make me a bit odd. But they don't stop me from functioning. And I'm lucky in that sense, because for some people, for some autistic people, some of the challenges they face are more significant and have a bigger impact on them. I'm very lucky that I'm not significantly impacted by my autism.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, we've been talking it a lot. We
Yes.
still, I think we only had 3 questions so far, so we've already been talking for a
Yeah,
long time, but
I do
so
talk
far.
a lot.
Well, it kind of brings me automatically that next question, because it feels there is a lot of drive, there is a lot of passion in this conversation. Do you know what drives you, where this is coming from?
So what drives me, it's making things, being creative, being productive, having ideas. I mean, like, my head is always full of ideas, and I have so many lists all over the place of all the things that keep popping into my head. I've got a massive long list all over the place of all the things that I want to make that I'm never going to make, because there just aren't enough hours in the day. But if I haven't produced something at the end of each week, and when I say produce something, that might just be a document, or it might just be an idea, but if I haven't, I don't like being very idle. I like relaxing, and but if I don't feel like I've achieved something by the end of the day, then I struggle with that. And when I make things, I like, I'm a novelist, I've written novels, I like to create talks that I'm going to produce, I like putting slides together, I like creating content to teach people. I like writing software. I'm currently making a game which I'm going to release on the App Store very soon, an iOS game. So yeah, I like making things. I like being creative, and the idea that I might have been productive or created or produced something that drives me.
Well, you definitely need to share the link to the app that you're releasing. Even if you're releasing it after this video is released, we'll just add it for the people who watch it later on.
Yes, thank
I
you.
would
Well,
definitely
I'm
be
hopeful that it'll be in the next month or so that it'll finally find its way onto the App Store.
great. I will try to avoid too much extra questions because it will take so long. But still, you said something briefly that you like relaxing, but you like to create. Is it also something when you're relaxing that you try to achieve something like finish a book, reading a book, or is that different when you relax?
I actually do enjoy. No, I was going to say I enjoy doing nothing. That's not true. I'm not very good at doing nothing. Like, for instance, meditation is not something I have done meditation, but I didn't last very long with it because I'm just too impatient. So when I say doing nothing, what I mean is having a very long bath, or going for a walk, or maybe even just sitting and staring out the window. But if I do that, I'm going to be thinking. Or watching, like, one of the things that I do enjoy, although I have to get the balance right, is just binge watching, like things like
Mm.
crime thrillers. Or at the moment, I'm binge watching Friends because I've just had COVID. Actually, I still technically have COVID, but so I've been watching Friends episodes back to back. So sitting around and
You
being,
can even check things off like, okay, I've now watched so many episodes or
yeah,
whatever.
but I call that not being productive. So that's what I mean when I say relaxing. But typically, while I'm doing those things, even when I'm in the bath, I will have a phone nearby or a pen and paper, so that I
Mm.
can write things down. And I'll be constantly thinking of messages I want to send people or things I want to Google. Um, and I'm terrible when I'm watching telly. I'll always have a phone at my side, and I'll typically be playing a game as well as watching telly because I get very fiddly. I have to do something else as well. So I like games. Like, one of the games that I'm building involves moving shapes around on a screen. I love games that involve moving shapes around on a screen. So games that you don't have to think about very much, but that give you something to do and something to fiddle
The
with.
fiddle and
Yeah.
yeah, might help me because I don't really like to watch television, and maybe things like that might help me. So I'll definitely have
Mhm.
to check that out. And I recognize the part about you saying I love taking a bath, but then I need to have a book with me so that I can do something, whatever, and then I can stay in hours in the bath without a
Yeah.
problem. But without a book, that's just impossible.
Yes.
Um, you talked about many different things that you've done already. What is for you your biggest achievement or something that you're really, really proud of?
So I was going to say that I've had two novels published, but then I realised that really my biggest achievement is my children. So I have two amazing children. I'm always a bit wary of when people, particularly women, to be honest, when they list that as their achievement, because I want to say,
Mhm.
yes, but that's not the only thing. You're allowed to do other things as well as be a mother. You don't have to only exist for the sake of your children. But actually, my children are amazing, and I do think that I can take some of the credit for that, and I'm very, very proud. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit dodgy to say they're my achievement because they have both amazing achievements under their belt, and they're their achievements, they're not my
But
achievements.
you put the layer below that
Yeah.
kind of grew where they grew on. Yeah, I get that. I get both feelings. I recently did a workshop with many people and we asked a similar kind of question, and like I think 80 or 90% of the people said my children. And it's like, yes, it's true, but that is like all of parents. But of course, if it feels bad to not say it because I think similar, all of us, well, most of the parents are really proud of their children.
And also it's a big commitment, when you
Oh,
have
yeah.
a child, and you do put a lot of work into it, and it does, it does take a lot of your energy. So I feel like it's worth acknowledging that, and giving ourselves, all of us, a bit of a pat on the back for having done that. But yeah,
And
the
it
other one
never
is that,
stops.
yeah,
It
it never
never
stops.
stops.
It never stops. But the other one is that I have published two novels, and I am also very, very proud of that.
Yeah, it's well, that's the kind of thing I was looking for the kind of things indeed that you put, because writing is also a lot of work. You need
Mm,
to do the commitment to keep writing it. Having an idea for a book, it's easy, but having the commitment to finish something and to
mm.
polish it until to do something that is actually enjoyable for reading for other people is definitely something that
Yeah.
That's
It's surprisingly difficult. Even when you know it's going to be difficult, it's still surprising how difficult it is. It took me 4 years each to write both novels, so 8 years altogether. And that was longer than I thought it was going to take. And it was more work than I thought it was going to be. And it was harder to do than I thought it would be. So I'm very proud that I stuck them both through to the bitter end, and also managed to make them good enough that somebody wanted to publish them. So
yeah, that's definitely an achievement. But like you say, there's not many people who can live of the books, even in IT. I forgot the number, but I recently heard a number about the number of books that a typical book, the number of sales a typical book sells. And okay, in Belgium it's in Dutch, so that the whole part is it's a lot less. But still, I was amazed by how low that number was. It was like,
yeah.
wow.
So anybody who's listening, who's thinking about writing a book, great idea, do it, but don't do it because you think you're going to make money out of it, because it's
Exactly.
not an earner.
Exactly.
In IT, a good reason for writing a book is that it increases your reputation. It gives you something that you can point to and say, "This is who I am. I wrote this." But the book itself, the income from the book, the actual sales of the book, is unlikely to be the thing that you actually make your living from.
Exactly. That's the kind. You shouldn't do it just for thinking about the money and everything. But I would be really interested, indeed, to hear in the comments about people who are thinking about writing a book, who wrote a book, and share it, because it's indeed a nice achievement where people put in lots of time. It's like you say, but it brings us back to the bias of the beginning. It's even if you think it takes twice as long as you think, you can double it again, because it
Double
will
it
take
again.
much longer.
Double it again. Yeah, yeah. It's going to
And
take you
it's
at least 2 years to write a book, basically. At least 2 years, probably longer. And it will be really, really hard work.
yeah, and for me, so I have one of the books that I've published is about with the tips from the agile trenches, and even that. So I didn't write tips; they came from 89 other people, and even that took me 3 years just to collect it and to harass or ask people asking to write it. And yeah, it's a lot of work to do that kind of things.
Yeah,
um but it's very on top of, yes, you won't make any money, it's also very nice to actually have a physical copy of a book you wrote in your hands, and to literally say, okay, I've done this, I've achieved this. This is
it is. Yeah,
basically kind of memory of 3 or 4 or whatever, how long it took you, years of your life, that of all the moments that you put into that. And that's also very nice.
yeah, the thing that always catches me by surprise is when I see copies of my novels on other people's bookshelves, even though I knew full well, like, so, my friends and family, they all have copies, but I forget, and I'll be around their houses and I'll suddenly see my own name on their bookshelves, and that's I like it when that happens, and I hope that there is an IT book in my future. I am just beginning to have conversations with people about that. So we'll see. We'll see. I don't even know what it's going to be about yet. So, but maybe at some point in the future, there's going to be another book with my name on the spine.
I would love to see this, and definitely if you need, well, I don't know if I will know anything about the topic you're writing, but if you need someone to proofread, I would love to help out.
Ah, okay.
I like doing that. So I
Yeah,
like doing that. So I want to go to the next tip about personal agility. Did you already shared some ways on how you work? Is there something that for you is helping you to do your work, or something that yeah, you have?
yeah.
Because I've noticed that many agilists have some kind of thing that is good to share.
Yeah, and it's not new. You will have heard it before, but it's just get it out there. Whatever it is that you're doing, whatever it is that you're creating, get it in front of users as quickly as possible. And actually, before I'd even heard of Agile, when I was writing my novels, the way that I did it was that I would get early drafts in front of trusted readers, in the hands of trusted readers, as soon as possible, before they were finished. So, like, the first couple of chapters, my husband was the main person. I was lucky that
Pick them.
he was an editor, so he was really, really useful. But I knew other people as well who were writers and editors who helped me with that. But getting early drafts, just the first couple of chapters, getting other people to read it and give me honest opinions about what they thought of it, it had a really big impact on my ability to refine and refine and refine. And it's very iterative, just constantly refining, getting feedback, and refining. And an interesting thing is happening with this app that I'm making. The first app that I made, I originally I was pairing with Sal Freudenberg, and I'd got it to a point where really it's a playable game. People I know who are testing it, they play it, I play it a lot. And Sal said to me, "Why have you not released that game on the App Store yet?" Don't know. That's a really good question, because it didn't feel finished to me. It's like, it's not done yet. And the reason it's not done yet is because there's still a million features that I want to implement, and there's a million things wrong with it, and there are a million ways I can see to make it better. But it's good enough that people could play it, and actually getting it out there would mean that I would have a better idea of what the rest of the world thinks about what needs improving on it, because they might not think the same as me, and they're ultimately the customers.
And maybe they like it enough that they would actually start paying you to do this, to do more of these features. So yeah,
Yes.
it's yeah. I'm just looking at the book that is near me. I have this one, Show Your Work. This is kind of telling the story that you're saying. You have to put out your work as fast as possible, iterate, write about how you do the work and whatever. It's literally that. Bring it out, and yeah, it's, for me, it's one of the core things about agile is releasing it. But the way it's written, when we talk about agile, we don't stress this enough, that okay, when it's as small as possible, put it out, get real feedback from it. And it works for so many different things, like you say, novelist, all these kind of things. Yeah, it's so important. And yet so many of us, I do the same thing, just like you said about that game. We're so much at the level that we think, yeah, but I have so many other ideas, why don't I will wait and it will even be better. Yeah, no, get it out. And yeah,
Mm.
it's and then you get it in a certain state where you can do more. I've released as a kind of, well, a joke isn't, not really, but I made a small board game, an Android board game with my son, I think 7 or 8 years ago, when he was 12, just as a kind of thing. And we released it. And for me afterwards, I thought, yeah, but there's still a lot of other things to do. But for me, it was also about showing him, okay, this is the full path of delivering, not just writing it, but then you have to go back to the end, ask feedback from people. It's not something that we will work on very up. I don't think we have looked at it in the last 2 years, but still, it's something. Bring it out and get real feedback from people.
Yeah.
That's so much more valuable, and then you can decide if you want to invest more or not.
Yes.
And there's so many games that have many money is put into that, and they're dying. And then other very what is it, the current popular game Wordle, that was just brought out as a game for someone from his fiance, sorry, and that took the world by storm. And
Yeah.
it's probably very, very easy and not that much. And yeah, that's wonderful. We should do much more of that
Yeah.
kind of thing. So it's a really great tip. Thank you for sharing, because we don't talk enough about that, about bringing it out. And I definitely would like to hear in the comments also from people who said, yes, I have ideas and I don't bring it out. What's keeping you? Do you have any idea what's keeping you from releasing like that app? Was
So
there
it's
something
interesting.
specifically?
It's interesting. What it is that I think, well, I want people to have a go at it and instantly think, oh my gosh, this is amazing, rather
Mhm.
than having a go at it and thinking, well, it's all right, but I wish it did this, and I wish it did this, and I wish it did this. And I imagine myself sitting on their shoulders and watching them saying, yeah, but it doesn't do this thing that I want it to do. And I'd be thinking, I know, I agree. I want it to do that thing too. And I don't want it to give it to them until it does do all of the things, because I can't bear the idea that they'll think, oh, I don't like it because it doesn't do this. And it's like, I know, I agree with you. I had that idea too. And so it's really hard to accept that that yes, people will have criticisms, and there will be things that people don't like about it, but actually the things that they don't like about it won't necessarily be the things that you don't like about it. So, and until you get it in front of them, you're not going to find out.
And actually, the opposite is even worse. If you finished it and you put everything in it that you can think, and then they come up with other things you didn't think, that's actually even worse feedback, which
Yeah.
then it's like, I thought of everything, and now it's
Yeah.
it's yeah, I recognize that feeling, and I assume that a lot of us we recognize that. I want to go to the next question about remote working. You've been talking, well, we are in the pandemic. You just said you have COVID, so that probably means that you're locked in your house and you can only do remote work. um is there anything that you've learned about that that you want to share with the rest of the world?
Yeah, I mean, I've learnt tons about remote working in the last 2 years, but I've actually learnt something new in the last fortnight, really, because I've had COVID. So
Woo!
not
Very new.
yeah, not only am I locked in my house, I'm locked in my attic. So
Ah.
I'm not allowed to go downstairs. We have, well, we're very lucky that we have 2 bathrooms, and we have one that I'm allowed to use, which is on the next floor down. Nobody else is allowed to use it. But when I go down to the toilet, I put a mask on. Apart from that, I haven't left this floor of the house for it's 12 days now. There's currently a big debate about whether I'm allowed out or not, because I feel
Mhm.
okay, but I'm still getting positive tests, really, really, really faint lines, but they're still positive, and the opinion is divided on whether that means
Self-tests, you mean, huh?
it's safe. Yeah, so we call them LFTs, lateral flow tests. So the COVID tests that you can do yourself in your home. I'm getting very, very faint lines on those. So can I emerge or not? Don't know. But anyway, I've been living in the attic. I've got 2 rooms. I'm very, very lucky. I have this room, which is my study anyway, which is where I already spend the majority of my time, even before I had COVID. And then I've got a spare bedroom through there. And the spare bedroom was already sort of my spare bedroom. So when my husband snores,
Mm.
that's where I sleep anyway. So I quite often end up there. Most nights, to be honest, at some point I transfer beds. So even before I had COVID. And I've got it really nice in there. There's a rocking chair in there. And it's
Mm.
a nice place to chill. So and when I sit in the rocking chair in there, the cats come and sit on my knee. So it was already sort of my sitting room. And what I've discovered is that I can have my laptop on my lap while I'm in my rocking chair, and I can
Mhm.
do work while I'm in my rocking chair. And this is going to sound
Mm.
ridiculous because everybody else, I mean, I know I see so many people working on their sofas. And to be honest, I've been a little bit judgmental, being like, that's really bad for you to sit on a sofa with a laptop because it's not good for your posture. And I normally have always, if I wanted to do work, I came in here, I sat in a proper chair, my laptop is propped up on a stand, I have a footstool, everything is very carefully arranged so that I can have good posture, because I'm 52 and I've got arthritis and I've got various bits of me that creak and don't like the fact that I spend so much time sitting at a desk. But actually, and also I did like the idea of having a clear separation between work when I'm sitting at my desk and not work when I'm sitting in my rocking chair, and there is an argument for that. But what I've discovered is that I can sit in my rocking chair with my laptop in my lap and just chill and just do a different kind of work. There are some kinds of work that I can do from a rocking chair, and
Mm.
actually it breaks my day up more. It means that I'm more relaxed, and it's more enjoyable. So I'm still, most of my work will still be done sitting here, but now I realize I can do some kinds of work from my rocking chair in a much more relaxed context, and actually that's quite nice. That's all right, that's allowed. I can do that if I
Yes.
want.
So if I hearing is that you have kind of different spaces for different kind of work. That's kind of what you're discovering. And
Mm,
that's I
yeah.
like that because it makes sense. Yeah, I usually work around here because I'm most of the time I'm walking when I'm working, except if I'm recording this. But so most of my work is here.
Mm,
Except reading. Most of the reading I don't do at my desk. I might be in a chair, or I don't have a rocking chair, but actually might be a good idea. But it's that kind of thing. Reading somehow doesn't work really well here for me.
Mm,
It's kind of similar, even if it's most of the time work related or business reading. So I recognize that part. I don't have a specific place for reading because I can read in many different places, but not at
mm,
my desk. That feels kind of different. So,
mm.
and that brings me automatically to books. So, what's the last book or a book you want to share? It doesn't automatically have to be the last one.
So the last book I read was this book here. Wait a minute. There you go. Sky Burial by I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. I'm guessing something like Shinran.
And
Um,
putting it on the screen as well, the way you put it,
Fantastic. Yeah,
like what people might have seen, it's a little different than the cover that you showed,
yeah.
but
There's probably
it's the
more
same book.
information. Yeah, yeah. And actually, that book was lent to me by my friend Sal Freudenberg, who I think you've also met.
Hmm.
I actually, we're now very good friends, and I stayed at her house on my way home from Agile on the Beach, which I spoke at last year. And she gave me a pile of books. She lent me a pile of books while I was there, and this is the only one so far I've read from that pile because I'm finding it very hard to read at the moment. You would think
Hmm.
that I would have read more during lockdown, and I've read significantly less. Um, but
Any idea why?
It's partly okay. I can give you two reasons that they're only part of it. One is a really simple one, which is that it used to be when I worked in an office that I would always very deliberately take an hour for lunch every day, and I would use that hour to read. And so, whatever book I happened to be reading at the time, I would read it every day at lunchtime. And then that would mean that it was present in my mind. So, I was then more likely to pick it up at other times as well. And also, because I would sometimes cycle to work, but sometimes get a bus. If I was ever on public transport, then I would read on public transport. I'm not doing public transport hardly anymore. And I'm also not at work in an office. So, my husband suggested towards the beginning of the pandemic that it would be really nice if every lunchtime we got together and did the crossword together. So
Hmm.
now every lunchtime I do the Guardian cryptic crossword with my husband, which means I can't read a book. So that's what's partly that. It's partly not doing it at lunchtime and not being on.
But you do something together with your partner,
Well,
which is kind
exactly,
of nice
which
as
I think
well.
is probably
Exactly.
even more valuable. So I don't resent it. I'm just saying that's something that's
Hmm.
changed. And then the other reason is that I have been getting really obsessive about this game that I'm building, and any spare moments are spent on that. So spare moments that I might once have spent reading a book, and now spent working on my iOS app. But actually, I've only been doing that since I don't know, around about October time last year. So before then, I don't know, lockdown was just weird. It just the things I don't I can't I really explain it, but being able to focus on a book, on reading a book, became a thing that I found hard, and I don't really. I think that the change in routine was an element, but I don't know that that necessarily fully explains it.
But I'm asking because I hear this from a lot of people. I haven't heard it on on the channel here, but I heard it from a lot of people that for some people, reading was a lot harder in the pandemic. We've been much more at home. We've not been going out, and partially is indeed we're not in public transport. But even for the people who used to read at home, they enjoy it less. There's others who read a ton more, but most of the people who used to read a lot, they have a lot harder time reading it. And of course, the creating something that for me it feels indeed completely different when you're into something engaging, especially if you're doing it on a separate as your day-to-day job. Um, yeah, then all your time creates in it. That's indeed how that works, and that yeah, that gives also a lot of energy. So there's probably not much left for reading other things.
Mm.
Um, that's but tell me a little bit about the book. Well, you don't have to give away everything, of course,
It's
because
it,
that's
It's really interesting because it is a true story, but it's not entirely clear because I have read novels before which presented themselves as true stories, and it was quite
Mhm.
difficult to work out whether it was true or not. So I read the whole thing not being sure whether it was true or not. And it's written in a very narrative style. It's very beautifully written. So it feels like a novel, but apparently it is true. Although there are arguments about whether it's actually Chinese propaganda, but it's about and I have the most ridiculously bad memory, so I only just read it a couple of months ago and it's already fading. But it is about a woman a Chinese woman who followed her husband to Tibet a long time ago, and I can't remember the exact dates, but more than 20 years ago. um During, and again, I'm really bad at history, but there was a war going on between Chinese troops and Tibet. There was kind of an invasion of Tibet, I think, and her husband was sent as a doctor with the Chinese army and then disappeared. So
Mm.
and they'd only just married and they were terribly in love, but nobody knew where he was. She was told that he was dead, but nobody could tell her how he died, and she didn't really believe it. So she went to Tibet and then ended up just sort of getting stuck in Tibet, because Tibet is this
Mm.
very remote, wild, unforgiving landscape. And this was a long time ago as well. And she ended up living with a Tibetan nomadic family and having no way of reaching anybody, and just living in the wilderness in Tibet for a long time.
Mm.
And it's a fascinating story, beautifully written, and I gobbled it up. So I mean, it's quite a small book, so it didn't take me very long, but yeah, it's beautiful. Apparently it's a true story, but I haven't been able to find out anything about any follow-up information. So the true story is that the woman who the story is about approached a journalist who has written the book. So the book is written by a Chinese journalist who now lives and works in the UK. And she makes it her job to tell stories about Chinese women and their lives. And this woman, the woman who the story is about, approached the journalist, told her life story, and then disappeared. And at the end of the
Mm.
book, she says, if anybody can find this woman, I would love to be in touch with her. But I think the book itself was published, let me see, in 2005. So it was published almost 20 years ago. And she was telling a story that went back 20 years. So that's why I thought maybe in the last 20 years, the author had managed to find out more about what happened to the woman. But my brief Googling didn't find out anymore. So I don't
But
know.
it brings also a lot more, well, the secrecy or the fact if it happened or not might actually be kept alive. Of course, for selling the book, that might be interesting as well. But it's a wonderful story, true or not. That's
Yeah,
an interesting to
yeah,
think
I
about.
really enjoyed it.
So yeah. So I want to go to for me the most interesting question is that what question you think I should also ask you, and what's the answer?
So I wasn't sure if you were going to ask me the standard question that I always ask at the end of every podcast, which is where can people get hold of you and do you have anything to plug? So in case you're not going to ask me, that would be, but if you're going to ask me that anyway, then
That's for the end, yes,
that's fine.
indeed.
Okay, so we can put that to one side. My question would be, how do you avoid self-doubt? Uh,
Hmm.
and my answer would be, I mean, this is only, again, one part of an answer. There are many different things you can do, and self-doubt is something that I have always struggled with and still struggle with. But I think by the time this is published, we will be able to announce this. It's going to be announced to our company tomorrow. I'm leaving MedTech. I'm starting a brand new, exciting adventure. I'm going to go freelance. And my plan is that as a freelance, I will do all of the things that I know that I'm good at and that I enjoy. and that will be my job. And I've been incredibly lucky that, particularly at Made Tech, but also at ThoughtWorks, I have been able to do a lot of the things that I enjoy. And this was a technique that I learned at ThoughtWorks via a book called Strengths Finder, which was introduced to all of us on a training course. The idea that typically we have tendencies, and more in some cultures than others, particularly in the UK, I think, to find the things that we're not good at and focus on them. So to find our
Exactly.
weaknesses and say, oh dear, I'm not very good at that, so I need to get better at that. And that can often involve a lot of pain and heartache. And sometimes that can be useful, but a lot of the time what you're actually doing is finding the things that you don't enjoy, that cause you stress, and that actually you don't have a natural aptitude for, and banging your
And then
head.
work on that.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and it can make you miserable, and it doesn't necessarily lead to success or happiness. The alternative is to find the things that you're good at and the things that you enjoy, which aren't
And
necessarily the same
amplify
thing,
that.
and amplify them and
Mm.
celebrate them. And it can be very
Mm.
difficult, because it can be very easy to think, well, if I'm good at it and I find it easy, therefore it must not be valuable.
Right.
The fact that I find
Because
it
it's easy for me, and so it should be easy for the rest of the world. So what brings
obviously
it is
not
value.
worth anything. If I don't find it hard,
Yeah.
then it's not valuable. But what I've been able to recognize is there are things that I find easy and that I'm good at. So for instance, public speaking is something that I seem to find significantly easier than a lot of other people, and that I seem to be quite good at it, and I really enjoy it. And it took me a long time to work out that could actually be part of my job. Like standing on a stage and performing for an audience was a thing that I would do in various contexts as a hobby, but the idea that I could be paid to do it and that it might actually be part of my job was just like, huh? And even when I started, speaking at events, it was a sort of a hobby. It was a thing that I did in my spare time. And then I realized that as a consultant that I could work for organizations who would let me do it as part of my job, and I didn't have to take time off to do it. It could actually be officially
Hmm.
part of my job. And now it will be an even bigger part of my job. And I will be looking for opportunities for people to pay me to speak at events, and that's not the only thing. So that's one thing that I'm good at and that I enjoy. Podcasting is another thing that I've discovered that I seem to be quite good at and that I definitely enjoy. Actually, that will go on a back burner for a little bit, but I hope there's more
Mhm.
podcasting in my future. But also teaching, one-to-one coaching, helping people to learn. So being a technical coach is something that I will be, kind of putting a lot of energy into, and finding paid work. And you would that interestingly, as a consultant, that's only part of my job, whereas as a freelance I can say that is my job. And again, I can say these are the things that I'm good at and these are the things that I enjoy, and the other things that I find incredibly stressful, don't enjoy, and aren't very good at, maybe I just don't have to do those things. So
Yeah, it's
the question was, how do you avoid self-doubt? The answer is find the things that you're good at and that you enjoy and dial them up.
and do them much more. Yeah, I recognize a lot of what you're saying. As a freelancer, it took me a while to realize that, okay, I should really be doing the jobs that I like to do, saying no to a lot of the other things that, like you say, some other people might be doing better, or feel self-doubt about it. And actually, the more I do that, the happier I am, the happier my clients are. I might even get paid more in many occasions, because it is my focus, what doing. So instead of, indeed, like you so nicely said, banging my head on the wall on doing things that I don't like, that I might not be good at, and whatever. So, and the better we are at that, the better the people around us know, hey, this is what Claire is doing. This is what we should ask her for. Now the whole world knows that, oh, if you want to have a good speaker, well, ask Claire, because we all know, we've seen, they can Google you, they can find presentations of you. And yes, you are a good speaker. So that is indeed, if they're looking for someone to bring on stage, they should contact you, indeed.
Thank you.
So it's, yeah, but it is true. We should, and I've noticed that. Well, I helped my daughter publish a book, and I realized that it was so much easier for me to talk and be proud of her book than to about all the books that I've written before and about myself. And it's like, wait a minute, this is what I'm trying to tell her. You should be proud, but how come it's so much easier to talk about her things than about my things?
Mm,
It's insane. And it's like you say, we should be much more proud about the things that we're really good at, that we like to do. And yeah, then the whole self-doubt goes away, and we shouldn't focus on these negative things.
yeah.
Thank you for that answer. That's really is wonderful. I'm kind of surprised that you said it's only going to be announced tomorrow at Maytag, because I kind of knew this already. I'm not sure if you put it
I
on
told
Twitter
you.
or somewhere.
It's because I told
Uh,
you in a private email. That's how you knew. Yeah,
that's how I knew. Okay,
yeah.
so now I know again a little bit, but this is not going to air. Just for the record, for the people, we're recording this on the 20th of March, but it will probably be on air a lot later, somewhere in April, I think. I don't know yet exactly, but we'll see about that. So brings me to that, well, almost last question, but the last question, the official question is that who should I ask next? Because I'm really looking forward to who you want to invite here.
So I have one suggestion, but I also have a backup because I thought you might have already asked her. So my first suggestion is Emily Bache, who I'm actually going to be working with to do some technical coaching. So if she's not already on your list, then she should
Well,
definitely.
she's on my list, but I haven't invited her, and that's with a lot. I have a list of more than 200 people, but I'm kind of always waiting for excuses to invite people. So now you just gave me the excuse to contact Emily and said, "Hey, look, like." But you can give her the second
So
name as well.
my
But first,
third.
tell me a little bit about Emily. Why do you want to invite her?
So Emily is amazing, and she's very highly regarded by a lot of people, and she has been doing technical coaching for a long time now, and she talks and writes about techniques such as test-driven development and continuous integration, and refactoring is a big one for Emily, and she's made this fantastic. If you look for it, her name is spelt EmilYBache. And you can find her GitHub, and she has a bunch of refactoring exercises on her GitHub, which are so useful. And they're in all of the languages, any language you could possibly imagine, because it's open source and people have contributed. So all of the exercises are available in multiple languages. So all of these really useful refactoring katas. And she's just very, very knowledgeable and experienced about good XP programming practices, and she does a lot of coaching, and she's pretty brilliant. I'm very, very pleased that I'm going to be working with her.
I can imagine. I can imagine. It's she's really wonderful sharing, and like you say, it's in a kind of open source way, which is something that is very near to me as well. Again, this is about showing your work, but also sharing it with the world and at the whole. Like you say, she shared it, and because of that, lots of other people are sharing their answers in multiple languages. And now all of us, we have so much more value here, and we can learn so much more from that. So that's really nice, and that's how I recognize how she is, I would say, approaching the world in a sense, and that's something I like as well. So who do you have next
So
on the
the
list?
other one is Ted M. Young, not to be confused with Ted Young, because they're operating very similar spaces, but Ted M. Young, M for mother. He also does a lot of technical coaching, and he runs online courses, and he runs ensembles where he works with people. Very similar space, in fact, TDD and refactoring and XP practices. But here's somebody who's a little less well known, so I kind of wanted to get him on people's radars, because he's absolutely excellent. He has a lot to share. He does a lot of live streaming, so he's on Twitch, and he has a lot to share about good software engineering practices. He's very, very thoughtful about what he does.
I think I follow him on Twitter. But I don't think I've met him. Emily, I've met. I'm pretty sure I met at the conference, but with that, I don't think I've met him. So this is, again, this is indeed the kind of way, and this is why I was allowing two names,
Mhm.
because for me the goal is indeed to reconnect with old friends and to make new friends, which is exactly what you're doing. Of course, if I keep asking everyone two or three names, it just will double and triple the list, but that's fine. I don't have an end view in time yet. We'll just see how that goes. So that brings me indeed to the thing that you talked about briefly about if people want to reach out to you, or if you want, what's something you want people to know, or you share something.
Yeah.
Let's start with that.
So you've got the link to my Medium site, which has lists of upcoming events that I'm going to be speaking at. There's a few that will be published soon. Actually, by the time this goes out, they'll probably be published. I'm in conversation with a few people about some upcoming events. And from there, you can get to my Twitter. Easiest way to get in touch with me is via Twitter DM. My DMs are open. And I'm available to speak at events, to do technical coaching. Anybody who's interested in good software engineering practices, that I always have things to say, and I'm always happy to help.
Happy to help. And like, to bring back to the beginning of the conversation, you ask a lot of questions to make people think really hard, because that's what I've noticed also into the talks. They're interactive, but they're yeah. When I go, or actually today, I would say when I listen to some of your talks, either it's a podcast or either it's something that is on YouTube where you talked before, you always make me think. So like today as well, it was again, as usual, a very wonderful conversation. This is by now the longest conversation I've recorded.
Yeah, get me started.
uh,
It's hard to stop me.
it's yeah, that's the kind of thing. That's for me. Yeah, I think most people who are here, who are still listening here, know it. I'm still discovering the interviewing and how to interrupt people. But this is so wonderful conversations, and I don't want to edit. This is on purpose. I don't want to edit things out of the conversation, which is of course the official. I've had a feedback from an official interview who said, yeah, but this is really good, but you can cut out these things. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly not what I want to do. I really wanted to have a conversation, and it should feel like a conversation. But then with people like you who have so much energy, so much nice stories, it might take a while. But well, yeah, that's what they get. This is like Lisa Atkins says, this is the conversation that we're having in a bar at an agile conferences, and you're all invited to listen in to that. And if you have other ideas, if you're inspired, feel at things into the comments about the different things. We'll, after this conversation, I will ask you to send the links to the games and the books and everything that you have, to just put them into the show notes that people can reach out and find them. And I'm wishing you actually a lovely Sunday. It's noon, I think, around you there. I
Mhm.
think so. It's well, I don't know what's the weather on your side,
It's
but it's rather
beautiful,
sunny
actually.
here.
Yeah, blue
So
sky,
you can,
little fluffy clouds. It's not warm, but it's a beautiful day.
well, I would say you can go out, but I don't know if you're allowed yet, so I'm not sure how that will
Yes,
work.
yes, we will have to decide whether I'm allowed or not. I can at least go in the garden.
So you can, and then stay away from the rest of the family and say,
Yeah.
look, now the garden is for me. You can have it in half an hour, something like that. It feels kind of like this. Yeah, so that's it. Well, I wish you that lovely day, and we'll keep in touch. And bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.